Welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. I don't very often in this podcast, if you've been listening to this for a while, have repeat guests along. But sometimes there are certain people that I've been connected to over years that they have so much to offer that just telling their story isn't really doing justice. And Shawn Boyer, today's guest, I've just had such respect for him over the years of how he lives his life, and we'll get a lot more into this. So I'm real excited to have a conversation that doesn't necessarily cover so much just the, who you are and where you've been and what you've done, but what's really underneath that. So Shawn and I did podcasts together. It was actually a multiple podcast back in May of 2021. And if you're interested in hearing more of his story, which is really a phenomenal, powerful life story, go back to those episodes. I don't know actually what the numbers of them are, but from May of 2021, and I think you'll hear a lot more of that. But today, we're really just going to get a really brief update of what's going on professionally in your life. And then we're just going to share some of the, what I consider the life lessons that you've experienced, and me too, that kind of cross these lines between what we've done professionally, who we are on the inside, and what we do outside of the professional life. So Shawn, I'm really excited to have you back. It's been great to kind of catch up with you. And now we've stayed in touch over these years, not as much as we would like, but I'm just real excited to have you back.
Well, super excited to be back, and thanks a ton for having me. And the repeated nature of it may be because I'm so long-winded and I need to be more concise.
No.
A single episode, but yeah, super excited to be back.
Yeah, no, this is great. It's going to be so much fun to catch up on just a lot of things. Every time we've had breakfast or lunch together, it's just a rich conversation that I feel like is just this sharing of my learning so much from the different ways that you're living your life out, not just professionally, but personally and with your family. So we're gonna
Back at you. I learned a lot more.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get into a lot of this stuff. So this is, I think, going to be a rich and I think a really useful conversation for anyone that's listening, with a lot of kind of unplanned ideas about that you could perhaps put into practice in your life, in all of our efforts to just live a better life. And I'm going to use this word, and we'll probably use it a lot, to live a more intentional life, instead of what is so prevalent these days is to just live in reaction to everything happening. And we can't help that. So much of that's going on. But the more we can live intentionally, I just think there's so much of value in that.
Amen.
Yeah. So great. So before we dive into, I guess, a lot of that, I'd love to catch up those who are listening on what you're doing. And maybe you can just go back and give like the real Cliff Notes version of what you've done over your career, kind of from the professional angle, and maybe, a touch family real briefly, but so there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. I'll try to make it as concise as possible. So yes, on the work front, had started a company back in 2000 that was in the frontline hourly worker space. It was basically a two-sided marketplace where frontline hourly workers could find work, and then on the other side, these workers or employers could find these types of workers. And so again, started that in 2000, bootstrapped it initially with friends, family. Over time, ended up raising around a VC funding. We created a whole suite of software over time. ultimately, and we could dig into this more later if it ends up, becoming interesting, left there in 2013. And then we ended up selling to a private equity syndicate in 2016.
And that company was Snagajob.
And that company was Snagajob. Yeah, sorry.
Right.
So it's based here in Richmond, Virginia.
Right. So, a lot of people who listen to this are from Richmond, and you're probably familiar with the name Snagajob. Was really quite a force that, having worked in Richmond all through those years, it felt like it just sprung up out of nowhere and was a real force to be reckoned with. And you founded that, built it, then.
Yeah. And so then subsequent to that, so again, I had left there in terms of the operating capacity, stayed on the board in 2013, stayed on as the board chair for another couple of years, ended up selling the majority interest in that to this other group. And I would say too, and again, maybe we can come back to this later, but that was an emotionally hard time to be parting ways with something that I had cared so much for, still cared so much for all of the people who were there, felt like it still had so much additional opportunity and, different directions in which we could have run. But again, ultimately that wasn't God's plan at that time. And so I then spent, a couple of years just thinking about, gosh, what do I want to do next? I young and, I not want to be done in terms of working. And so really wrestled with what that was. I ultimately decided, I want to do something again from an entrepreneurial perspective. And I was, like you mentioned the word intentionality, at Snagajob, our whole mission, vision, values were incredibly important to us there. If I rewound the clock back to 2004 there, the first 4 years basically of Snagajob, all I did was just work. Like I wasn't married, I totally ignored friends and everything. I just felt like, all right, I got to pour myself into work. And I got to the point where it was just kind of a breaking point of, all right, God, like I can't work any harder than this. We were still burning cash and wasn't sure, how we were going to make payroll type of a thing. Is this going to work? Is it not going to work? We have to make it work, right? Because Uncle Bobby's invested and Aunt Linda's invested, and all these different people, right? My mom and dad. And
yeah, because you really, I remember and listen back on these episodes, you really stuck your neck out big time with Snagajob.
Yeah, it was, you look back on it now, or I look back on it now, and when I left to start Snagajob, I had been an attorney for a few years, and wasn't married or anything, so I didn't have that type of responsibility. But I did take out what 401k money I had. I had to defer all my law school loans. I literally took out every credit card that I could before I left the law firm because I knew I wasn't going to be able to get a credit card once I started my own thing. And I kept in a manila folder these yellow legal sheets of paper where it tracks which credit cards I'm transferring which money to back during those first several years, because it was, you get those promotions in the mail that you now would you probably throw away. Back then I didn't throw them away. I was like, ooh, I can transfer this balance over to this credit card, get free interest free for 6 months, and I'll find another one to transfer it over to. So that was it was a very stressful period of time.
It worked for you, but it's not the recommended way.
I don't think I would recommend that to anybody, right?
You hear that? We're not recommending
this. Yeah. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that out loud, but that was just the nature
it's what you did.
Was happening then. And then again, ultimately, I just got to this point where I was like, Lord, I can't, I don't know what else to do. And I was like, I give it to you. And literally that would have been an impossible thing for me to say. I feel like, 6 months before that, 3 months before that. And for whatever reason, I just got to that point where I was like, I give it to you and whatever you want to do with it. And I just felt like I've got to have more balance in my life. So, wasn't going to church at the time, didn't have a church. So I started searching for a church. I was, again, I ignored all my friends to the point where one of my best friends from college, I found out later he got married. I was like, Matt, I didn't even know you got married. He's like, dude, you never returned any of my phone calls.
Wow.
Like, well, yeah, true. So even those first 4 years of Snagajob, we were really intentional about, our mission statement and our vision and values. And for whatever reason, I was like, gosh, you know what? Like, I'm so maniacal about us having this at work. Why do I not have a mission, vision, values in my own life? So I then took time to craft a mission statement, for my own life. And then Same thing with the vision and the values. And then similarly, we were maniacal about setting goals at Snagajob, but yet I didn't have any goals in my own life. So I was like, okay, well, I'll employ the same philosophy in my own life that I do in my, in my personal life that I have in my work life. And so then I kind of went through this process of, okay, well, really it's not my work life and then my personal life. There are really these different buckets of my life that I care about. And just one of them happens to be, the professional side. So there is, my health, there is the spiritual, there is the trips and adventure side, and so I just, started thinking about these different buckets and then setting like goals in each of those. And again, I may be getting out of line of where you want to go at this
Yeah,
point, but, then the other thing was, at least at work was like, okay, well, if you have goals, they really don't become tangible until you put them on your calendar and you're going to put time to actually go do these things. And so I was like, all right, well, I've got my relationships bucket of goals. Well, what do I want to do there? And as, I don't know, unemotional as this sounds, I guess it was like, okay, well, my buddy Matt, let's go spend time together. When do we got to go spend time together? And like blocking the time on my
sure.
calendar to
Yeah.
go have a recurring lunch with Matt every, 2 months or, whatever that rhythm looks like. And so trying to take those same, types of principles that we operated with at work and employing them, these other buckets of my life. So it was a very, I write out my 3-year objectives and then my 1 year and then cascading that down to the month and so forth. My wife jokes on me all the time that, so we do these now as a family. And, when I plot out our goals with her, mainly me, and she obliges me with sitting down and going through them with me. But I have on there, the ages of what our kids will be, and stuff at the end of each year. She jokes that before our third son was born, he was due like in a couple of months, and I came running into our office. I was like, dude, we were like 6 months ahead of schedule on our third kid, according to what we said. We wanted to hit timeline wise with the kids. But anyway, so when I left Snagajob and I was, in this period of a couple of years trying to figure out what I was going to go do next, I was like, you know what? Like, I wish there was something that was more interactive that would help people like me plan, their goals, all cascaded from what their mission, vision, values was or are, cascade that down into some kind of interactive tool that helps them set goals, share them with the appropriate people, get them on people's calendars, have a doodle like functionality to find the time to go do these things together than the more privately sharing of the photos of the cool things that we did together, all for the purpose of having that, kind of motivate you to go do those things again.
Yeah.
So that's what is now goHappy. That's what that started as. And that initially started as a company named DieHappy. It's all about live a life
Oh, really?
intentionally. Yeah. Live your life intentionally so that when you do get to that ultimate time that we all will come to of dying, it's like, all right, well, I can look back on my life and feel like, I lived a really rich, intentional life.
I never knew that it actually started off with Die Happy. That gives some real color to it. So I want to get into more of goHappy. I'm going to start calling it Die Happy. goHappy. But I want to kind of, I guess, just piggyback on what you said about this path because it was very similar to me. And I think that's one of these places that we connected in that, I threw myself so into this entrepreneurial life that I was living of running companies at my particular stage. It was probably running multiple smaller companies. You were running the big Snagajob during that time. And there was this aha moment in a sense of saying these things that I so clearly know are adding value to the company. That is, we should understand what our mission is. We should understand what our values are. We should have a vision. We should set goals. I can so clearly see how this is a good way to run a company. Why wouldn't I live my own life that way? And I had that exact same kind of aha moment that this really is a good way of running a company. It's not as simple as that, but it's still very powerful. I need to have that in my own life. And so there was this translation that began with what I saw working at work that I then applied to my personal life. And then you begin to make these other translations of saying, well, if it works for me personally, could this work for my family?
Yeah.
And then if I'm going to do it there, what about my health?
Yeah.
And you begin to think this way, and it creates, in a sense, this snowball effect of, I guess, this trajectory that happens. And then, at least for me, I don't know if this was the case for you, I began to look at these various areas and going, are they all kind of keeping up?
Mm-hmm.
Am I overweighting,
Mm-hmm.
business to family? Or am I doing something now in my personal life that I ought to consider applying to my business life? And it began to create all of these parallels,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of what I hear going on with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Could not agree more.
And it was very cool. And I would not have seen that, I guess, outside of that entrepreneurial journey that was so demanding and so stressful, and almost out of desperation, we've
Yeah.
got to do these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's great. I love that. And to me, if those that are listening just picked up that one thing of saying, this idea of these things that we know are good in business, mission, value, vision, goals. We just said, why not try that our own life? We could cut off the podcast here, but let's go a little bit more. You goHappy. So you had this initial vision with goHappy. It's now been how many years?
Gosh, since the initial goHappy days, it's been 7.5, really.
Okay.
So yeah, and the goHappy, the logos were, if you're a Nirvana fan, you probably remember that T-shirt, the X's for the eyes, and then the smiley face. So that was our logo. And so what we fairly quickly found doing, discovery with who our target audience was that, gosh, trying to help people be intentional about all of the different areas of their life in an app, right? So if somebody's downloading this app in the wild, how do you get them to be more intentional about all these different areas? It was really hard. And so we started to really pare it down. And what we ultimately pared it down to that we were going to try to focus on was helping people be more intentional about their most important relationships in life. So then that got into, okay, well, it's kind of like a CRM tool for your most important relationship. So when is Tommy's birthday? When is Tommy and Wheezy's anniversary? And making sure that I'm getting notified plenty of time in advance so that I can actually buy Tommy a gift in advance of his birthday, or, buy you and Wheezy a card or whatever it might be. And then, the Mother's Day reminders and being able to collect, okay, well, here are the things that I know Tommy is interested in, and kind of putting those, against Tommy's profile. But then also there was this doodle polling type of functionality where, you're busy, I'm busy, especially if there's more than two of us trying to find time to get together, it's couples friends or whatever. It's like, well, that's a pain in the rear to find a time. So having this polling functionality to find time to get together. And then the messaging back and forth between these different groups of people. So kind of like a group chat in a, SMS context, but more interactive with the sharing of photos and all that kind of thing, more private than what you would do through, a social media platform like a Facebook group or whatever.
Right. Okay.
So that's where we ended up focusing. And the monetization plan was to ultimately, going back to our Snagajob roots, we felt like we cracked the code on that, like this more healthy social media kind of thing, making you be more, or helping you be more intentional about these important relationships. We could then take that to let's call it the Chipotles of the world or whatever, and say, hey, your employees are already using this tool in their personal lives. We think this can be an effective tool to help you communicate out from the corporate office to all of your Chipotle employees. Also be a tool that your GMs at the local level can use to communicate to your employees, and a way for your employees to communicate with one another. What we wanted to do, though, is to first crack that code on what I call the B2C side, right? Like just the consumer side, just the, intentionality around the relationships and helping people share stuff, before we then took it to the corporations. And by 2019, I was going through this accelerator at the time called Praxis, this faith-based accelerator, which was an amazing experience for me. It was really life-changing. And I remember sitting with a mentor, and I was describing to her what it was that we were. Sorry, go ahead.
Step back for a second. What's an accelerator?
So an accelerator is, at least in this case, they are there to help you identify more specifically the pain point that you're trying to solve, target audience for which you're trying to solve it for, your whole go-to-market strategy, the funding of it, the whole thing. Really, it's there to help entrepreneurs build their businesses.
Is it like a business coach or consultant?
It is.
Okay.
It is. And in their case, you're not giving away any equity to them to help you do that. I mean, they're about building redemptive entrepreneurial businesses. That's what they're there for. So they wrap this whole ecosystem around you to basically help people who are trying to build, what they refer to as redemptive businesses, and just help them do that better. So, the people in their ecosystem, they've been there, done that before, entrepreneurs, which is what my mentor was, who I was going to tell you about. They bring in people who are funders, right? Investors who may invest in these businesses. They bring in, speakers and so forth. They bring in, programs. It's really, in their case with Praxis, it's really, really amazing.
Wow. Sounds incredible. Which, again, it's part of my vision for this episode is thinking about these crossover points. And I think about an episode just a couple months ago about talking about key relationships and talking about advisors in our life and mentors. And that's another place where, if that works on the personal level, why not? Why wouldn't we do that on the corporate level?
Right.
Or vice versa. If it works on the corporate level, if we think we need wiser people to help guide us and to give us perspective on things in the business world, why wouldn't we also want to do that with our own life? And it's kind of this crossover that, I really believe could be of value to anybody, that we could all kind of use personal accelerators.
Yes, indeed. Well, interestingly, so I view you as a mentor. I view Fritz Kling as a mentor. Fritz is the one who introduced me to Praxis. So I would have never met the Praxis folks without Fritz saying, "Hey, Shawn, I think this would be of value to you."
Well, it is. I mean, we need mentors. We need people who see things that we don't see, who have context and experiences in their lives that are beyond. And, sometimes it's not such a clear line as mentor, mentee. It's good friends who can offer new wisdom to one another. But whether, again, in our personal life or in our business life or with our families, the wisdom that's behind bringing counselors, advisors, coaches, whatever word you want to use to it, you chose at a critical point in goHappy's life to say, okay, we need to get some fresh wisdom.
Yeah. And it was the difference maker. So sitting down with this woman and I'm describing to her, this current path that we're on, but the ultimate path that we, want to be on so that we can monetize it, right? Because if you're just sharing photos with friends and, planning to do things with them and, it's a CRM tool, you don't generate revenue from that because we didn't want to be an ad-based platform, which again, I feel like that incents behavior that's not helpful to the person. That's why, Instagram and Facebook and everybody are under such fire, right? Because this is an app-based platform. So when I showed her this, she got out literally a napkin and she drew this B2C thing over here, and then she drew the B2B thing over here. And she's like, Shawn, look, you're describing two if thens. You're saying if you're successful on the B2C side, then you'll hop over here to the B side. She said, that's a whole other if then. You've got to pick one of these two, and you need to pick one now. Which one would you pick? And immediately I was just like, I would pick the B2B side. I've lived in this B2C world long enough now to know it's hard. I mean, we'd gotten some traction, but we were in the 100 and some thousand number of people who were using it. That's not, that's decent, but it's not
100,000.
Yeah, but it's still, again, you're not generating any revenue from it, right? And you look at an Instagram or Facebook or,
Yeah.
TikTok or whatever, right? And they're in the, hundreds of millions, right? So
Right.
I was just like, gosh, I would go the B2B route. And I don't know why it took somebody else to say it that way for it to just become so clear to me, but it did. And then the next day I was meeting with more mentors. I was describing it to them. They totally resonated with it, with what she had said. And within 24 hours, it had literally shifted my thinking from being, in this one place to this other place. So I came back from that. They called it the summit. And I came back from that. We only had two other people in the goHappy team at that point because we were struggling. We had built the team to like 6, but we had to part ways with 3 of those folks just because we were trying to find our way. And those all 3 were really good friends who I had worked with at Snagajob. So that was tough.
Wow.
And so I came back to the other 2 people on the team. I was like, hey, here's what happened there. Here's what I think we should do. I think we should focus on the B2B side. And this is November of 19 at this point. Okay. So COVID had not yet hit. And they're like, totally makes sense to us. Hard to leave what we've been working on, but we'll let it kind of sit over here. We won't totally sunset that yet.
Major shift.
Yeah, but we'll go focus on the B2B side. So we did. And then we literally were getting ready to launch our B2B app in the App Store, and COVID hit. And we had a pilot lined up, like a pilot type of an agreement with Aspen Ski Resort. That was going to be a big deal for us to actually have a paying client. 3 days later, that was March, 3 days later, COVID hits. The guy from Aspen called us back. He's like, hey, we just had to shut the mountain down. We let go of all our people, or at least, temporarily. We don't know what's happening. We got to call this off. And I was like, oh no, like, what's this going to do? Because again, we were hanging on by a bit of a shoestring, in terms of funding. And then it ended up acting as a tailwind. So we were in Colorado at the time skiing for spring break. And I remember my wife was working with a different company at the time, and she was talking to this company, Metro Diner, which is a restaurant chain. And she was selling online learning products at the time. And the person was telling her that what they really struggled with was getting online learning down to the frontline hourly people. And my wife, Tennille, was like, well, you need to talk to my husband's company because that's what they do. They help get communication out to the frontline hourly employees. So I ended up having a call with this guy at Metro Diner, and he says, look, I love what you're doing. I love the native app-based approach, but can we just text our people with COVID just hitting? And we're trying to communicate to all these people, including our furloughed people. I don't want to have to make them download an app and learn some new behavior. Can we just text them? I was like, we can't right now. Give me a couple of minutes. Let me call our CTO, see if we can. So I call my buddy Dan, our CTO, and I'm like, Dan, can we just text? Or allow people to text him. Within like 30 minutes, he had made it so that they could actually send texts. Ultimately, they didn't end up signing with us. They were too far down the path with somebody else. But that really was another pivot for us where, we then were helping companies deliver messages to people, communicate with people out in the field via SMS instead of a native app-based solution. So anyway, that's somewhat of a long story, but, we went from 3 people. We're now, again, we're not big. We're 24 people. We work with about 320 different companies now. But we work with like all the Cracker Barrels around the country. So it's like 75,000 employees. We work with all of the Outbacks and Carrabba's and First Watch, PFG. So anyway, it's been a ton of fun.
Yeah, a ton of fun with a lot of hard work and a lot of stress associated with it.
Yeah, and there's a lot more of that stress buried in there.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
I'm sure. I think one of the things that I'm hearing in this, when I talk to people about the value of having a personal mission statement, having guiding principles for your life, having a vision, dream, I call it dreaming 360, these things. I think some of what I sense pushback sometimes is that, well, that just sounds so rigid.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you're just trying to plan and control everything in your life. And what I hear in your story is that more these things are frameworks that in some senses give you the freedom to pivot,
Mm-hmm.
because we constantly have to pivot.
Mm-hmm.
We constantly we have these aha moments, and we have to say, well, I need to do something totally different. But the presence of these good foundations
Mm-hmm.
of how we operate and what we do, week to week, kind of allows for some of that to happen. Your conviction, I guess, of the value of having mentors puts you in the place that Fritz, good friend,
Mm-hmm.
suggested praxis, and it creates this ripple effect by doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, so my life mission statement is to joyfully love people for exactly who they are and enthusiastically encourage them to reach the full potential of who God has uniquely made them.
Okay.
And
Can you say that again slowly?
yes, so to joyfully love people for exactly who they are and enthusiastically encourage them to reach the full potential of who God has uniquely made them to be.
Hmm. And how did you get to that statement?
That was, I would say, iterated upon over time. I think just going through a number of different frameworks over time with people. So I went through
Right.
something called Life 360 that really helped me focus in on, all right, what is that, at 360 degrees? What's that 1 degree where God has uniquely gifted you and given you these passions where you can make the most impact?
Right.
And so for me, like one of the things that I just love to do, I love the visioning piece. I love learning and I love to encourage. And so that's how ultimately I ended up coming up with that piece. I would say, and maybe we can come back to this later, I can tend to err on the side of envisioning what something could be, of someone they could be, and maybe pushing a little too hard on that side and not focusing as much on the first part of that of joyfully loving people for exactly who they are right
Right.
now. Because if,
Yes. Okay.
and anyway, and I bring that up because at Snagajob, our mission statement was um, to help put people into the right fit position so that they could maximize their potential and live more fulfilling lives. So there's that element of maximize potential, live more fulfilling lives. At goHappy, what we've iterated to over time, in terms of what we're doing now, is to help all frontline workers feel more valued and connected so they can reach their full potential and live more fulfilling lives. And so, that first part, to help them feel more valued and connected by their organizations. And we do that through a number of different things in terms of enabling to communicate and give shout outs and that type of thing. We also do it through allowing employees to give feedback to their employer on things that they wish they were doing differently, could do better, whatever it might be. So it starts first with, how do I help you feel valued and connected? Basically, how do we help you feel loved for exactly who you are right now?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we help encourage those people to maybe see something about themselves that otherwise they didn't see, right? How do we put career pathing opportunities in front of them? How do we help give them feedback? Oh man, you're gifted at this. If you took, you know, this path over here, you could be a GM at some point, whatever it might be. And so,
Yeah.
again, back to your point, like there's this intentionality piece of, okay, what am I really passionate about? While at the same time, knowing that, okay, I had, you know, and our team had specific goals around what was goHappy, and what that could be over time, this much more valuable, safer, more rich social media in a sense. But that wasn't God's plan ultimately for us.
Right.
And so holding that a bit loosely, but still, saying, okay, this is what we're, ultimately really passionate about, is helping people feel loved and connected. And how do we help them reach
Yeah.
their full potential?
So I think what's thought provoking with all of this is, it's real clear you've taken this idea of the value that comes of having a mission statement, and you've done this very clearly to the degree that you just know it right off the top of your head for these companies and for yourself in such a way. So these things leverage to one another. I also see so clearly the connection of who you are at the core with the way you form these companies. That is, the mission of the companies connects pretty closely to what your personal mission is. The other thing that really stands out to me is that your mission statement is something that's an expression of what you're really passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
You uniquely, what you feel personally very passionate about, but it also has this great aspirational element to it. It takes something that you go, well, this does not really come naturally to me, this joyfully piece of it. So this is the person I want to grow into.
That's right.
And so this is who I am, and it's also where I want to grow. And I think these are just all great ideas for people who are trying to figure out who they are and who they want to become, and how a process like you've gone through, which again, you took that step to say, I'm going to bring other people into this walk with me to help me with it. I'm not going to just Lone Ranger it.
Mm-hmm.
These are the ideas that I just think all of us could just benefit from so much, to say this intentionality gets to steer me and yet still live this, life that I know I've got to pivot
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. And I love the quote by PJ Marshall: "If you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time." Right. And I know
Yeah.
a lot of people will say, gosh, that does seem so structured, to structure your personal life, in these buckets and have these plans and all that kind of thing. I just want to be more free form and, spontaneous and that type of thing. And like you were saying earlier, you can plan time to be spontaneous, right? Like even having that is one of the things of, we're going to plan a couple of vacations, but we want a couple of things just to be spontaneous this year, and I
Yeah.
feel like if you don't, or I found, at least for me, if I don't take the time to step back and think about what's most important and who is most important to me, I'm in reactive mode, which is the same way in a business, right? Like a CEO would
Right.
be fired in a heartbeat if they went to their board at the beginning of the year and said, you know what, we're going to be more spontaneous based on what the market is saying this year. So I really don't have a plan for this year, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yet, so many of us will do that in our personal lives.
Well, and the result, unfortunately, and unintentionally, is that we miss a good friend's wedding.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, that's the type of thing. So yeah, there are lots of ways, and we could dive a lot more into it. I'm thinking particularly of vacation abroad that we and I are planning, and thinking of kind of the fun of having a broad structure, but yet leaving a lot of it unplanned.
Mm-hmm.
And so the plan is to be unplanned,
Yeah.
and that's okay too.
And that's so free,
Yeah.
right? It's like we don't have a plan. We intentionally don't have a plan. You're not stressed about not having a plan.
Yeah, yeah. So goes so much into this, but I'd love to also hear just a few of your ideas of how you've taken some of this mission, vision, values, goals, and for instance, applied it in some other areas of your life. Like particularly, I think that a lot of people struggle with how do you put that into practice with your family.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are there a few ways or things that have happened with your family that probably outside of this wouldn't have happened?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, similarly, we have our mission, vision, values as a family. And we have one of our goal buckets is trips and adventure. And so we sit down at the beginning of the year and we'll plan that year, the different things that we want to go do. And we'll plan them even into the next year sometimes. And, so for example, one of my goals, and ultimately going to be a family goal, was to take an out west trip for a whole summer in an RV. And so we did that several years back. And one way, it was a terrible time to go do it, given the age that the kids were, just given work and everything. But, you know, it was probably one of the best, if not the best vacation we've ever taken.
I
And,
imagine.
and there were so many amazing memories. We still talk about the trip all the time. And, from the work perspective, you figure it out, right? Like you can get up earlier than the rest of the family and I can get stuff done. I could block certain times of the day, or certain days of the week where, I was able to get work done. But I'm so thankful that we did that. I think it's all about prioritizing, right? Where it's like, okay, yes, my work is incredibly important to me and the work that we're doing, I feel like is meaningful and I don't want to shirk any responsibilities there. While at the same time, my family is really, really important to me. And if I had to stack the two against each other, I would say my family is more important to me than, the work bucket of my life. And going and making memories and, doing these trips and creating this adventure for a family is a really important piece to me. It may not be for some people, but it is for me. And so I
Right.
prioritize that more heavily than, being, out of the office and, trying to, coordinate wonky schedules to make it happen.
Well, I remember when you told me about that summer, and it's an incredibly bold move, and it's one that certainly I would have looked at, I think, decade or two ago and said, well, it's a great idea, but I could never do it. I was an
Mhm.
entrepreneur like you. You kind of took that fearless thing that I think that you really do well and just went, well, it might not be easy, may not be the most convenient time, but we could do it. So let's just do it. And you found a way of making it work. That was an encouragement to me to say how often I'll have an idea and it'll be an idea that'll go, that would be really good. And then I quickly figure out all the reasons that it won't
Right.
work,
Right.
that I can't do it.
Yeah.
And then quickly discard what could be a good idea. And I think you have a bias, which I really appreciate, to saying, well, let me take it a little further. Let me take it a little further down the road because I know what is my higher priority. So before I say no, I want to really, I'm just not going to let go of that easily. And I think that's also just something that it's good for me to learn. And, there are things that are maybe some of the most valuable, life changing experiences that come from that decision to do what seems like you can't do. I think of, well, really for me, this podcast,
Hmm.
to think of, at, let's say, roughly 60, learning a completely new skill and doing all of this and standing behind microphones and doing that when I didn't really need to do it or have to do it. And I think of just how rewarding and powerful and what I've learned from doing these podcasts over now almost 5 years or 5 years plus. And then I think of, this experience, and you could have just worked through another summer
Hmm.
that summer, and you would probably not be able to remember back a single thing
That's
that
right.
had happened at work.
So
And yet you have a whole summer of memories, and your kids and your wife have a whole summer of memories that will probably go the rest of your life.
yeah.
Let me throw an example that I think of that I love, that at least for me was edging. We decided to do trips with our kids wherever they wanted to go for their 16th birthday. I realize people can't do it. It's such a blessing that we were able to financially do it, even though it was a stretch. And I think of, for me, this trip that I had with my son Alex to California for us to play golf, which we both love together, at Pebble Beach,
Oh, wow.
one of the great, bucket list places to play. And I think now of that trip, which was many years ago, and I remember it in vivid color, every piece of it. And I could have just so easily went, well, it's just not practical. It's not reasonable. It's going to be hard. Don't know whether the timing's right. There were so many things that were not right about the timing. And yet we chose to do it. And we have the memory of a lifetime as a result. So I guess that's maybe another kind of big encouragement to people that, when you think about what really matters and you have some of these goals, if we want to call them goals, whatever, there's just so much of life to experience by taking these risks, together. So anyway, thank you for sharing that. 3 months, 3 months. That's powerful.
It was a ton of fun. And I think one of the things that did too is to show us we can do this. And so since then, we do adventurous things during the summer each summer because I just feel like our kids are going to be off to college. Our oldest will be off to college in another 2 years. And so, I don't know how many more summers we'll have them trapped to go do stuff with us. So
Yeah.
it was like, hey, yeah, you know what? We made it work. Let's do it again.
Yeah. And it's a whole different perspective on life. Because we're just so prone to think, well, we can't.
Right.
I can't. Our company can't. We as a family can't. And when you start, which you did by taking a risk, when you start to create that mentality, well, we can't. We may not choose to,
right?
But it's not because we can't. That's a whole different mindset. So big encouragement to people. Well, we've thrown out kind of a lot of ideas for people. I hope those that are listening will go back and listen to your story because I think there's this pattern of intentionality and fearlessness that I think we can all learn from. And there are these practices of being, and employing other people's wisdom, of setting goals across all of these different buckets that I think is so valuable. And the whole thought for me in this particular podcast is there are lessons that we learn in certain silos of our life, whether it's business or our families or our spiritual lives or our health, that can so easily translate and create this powerful mechanism in other areas of our life. So I hope people will actually begin to just rustle their own minds and go, this is an area that's working for me. What am I doing here? How might that work if I applied it over here? And I think we're kind of uniquely pushed to do that as entrepreneurs, where we have to make things work. So anyway, thank you for sharing so many of these just really specific lessons. And, I love your intentionality and fearlessness. And I'm encouraged with that. And hopefully everybody listening is encouraged with that. Share this episode, share these thoughts, these challenges with those around you. And I just want to encourage people to a more intentional, bold life. There's so much to be experienced. There's so much life to be lived. I think when we choose to just step outside of what maybe seems possible in a moment. So, your life is a testament to that. And, so appreciate you sharing all these.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely love being with you as always.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everybody for listening. Share this broadly. And thanks for joining us on this episode of Space for Life.